My conversation today is with astrologer, author, and co-host of the Plant Cunning podcast, Isaac Hill. Isaac has immersed himself in the study of the stars and, along with his co-host, A.C. Staubel, is setting the table for great conversations with top practitioners on herbalism, magic, astrology, gardening, and spirituality. Isaac is also in preparations to host the Plant Cunning Conference, a 4-day event taking place July 26th to the 28th at Cohosh Creek Herb Farm and Sanctuary in Columbus, New York. Isaac and I sat down to talk about astrology, Western and Eastern, herbalism, and the Plant Cunning podcast, his new book entitled The Heathen Golden Dawn, and much more. I'm Ike Baker, and this is the Arcanum Podcast. It's great to have you on.
It's great to be here. Really, I'm impressed with the work you're doing here, and I'm glad to be part of the podcast. So, yeah, glad to be here.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I like your work as well.
Thank you.
I don't often get to talk to herbalists, although I have a background in herbalism. I started out actually in just like your run-of-the-mill Western herbalism, and very quickly progressed to Chinese herbalism, and then here we are in alchemical sort of stuff. But so I like to have people like yourself on because I feel like, it sort of broadens the overarching conversation that's happening on the podcast. So, but I want to know about you. Give me a little bit of your background. How'd you get into specifically working with plants? And are you in New York? Are you from New York?
Yeah, I live in central New York with my partner, who is an herbalist, and I wouldn't necessarily call myself an herbalist because I don't heal people with herbs. I'm more of a plant person, And I've always been a plant person. I was homeschooled when I was a kid, and I was allowed to just like roam in the woods whenever I wanted. Basically, I had to do my math and stuff, but so I was out in the woods all the time. I was like learning about wild edibles, when I was 8, 9, dug a pond when I was 9, that kind of stuff. So I've always been really interested in plants, always had plants as part of my life, going back forever, basically. But yeah, I'm also an esotericist. I've written a book, The Heathen Golden Dawn, which is, a very, occult oriented. It's an occult. It's a book on occultism, practical occultism, and there is herbal elements to it too. I have the podcast, Plant Cunning Podcast, where we talk to a lot of herbalists, and I also like to broaden that conversation too, because in my opinion, like healing people, working with plants, magic, alchemy, these astrology, these are all related systems, and it's good for people. I feel like we're too specialized sometimes these days. And it's good for people who are just an herbalist to be able to know what's going on in the magic community, get to know what's going on in astrology, and ideally like learn from them and broaden their perspectives and their practice as well.
So which came first for you? The plant stuff or the esotericism?
Well, I said probably the plant stuff. Definitely the plant stuff, though. I remember when I was a kid too, like drawing all these like pentagrams and Star of Davids and all these kind of, I would make these esoteric symbols.
Yeah, it'd be pretty weird to see a 9-year-old like carving a pentagram into a table or something like that. It'd be pretty frightening.
I don't know. So it's probably a past life thing. But yeah, I didn't really get into esotericism until later. Definitely.
And how that happened? Which avenue did you end up taking? I mean, obviously there's a tremendous amount of crossover between nature enthusiasts and or people that are involved in herbs and herbal medicine and stuff like that, and the neo-pagan communities, things like I guess nowadays we would want to call it more like witchcraft or hedgecraft like that. But back when probably we were growing up was you heard it referred to as Wicca. Did you come in through any of those gateways? Or
actually, contrary wise, I found, so I got into esotericism through spirituality, I would say.
Right.
first. And in college, I met a one of my primary spiritual mentors, Art Tickner, who was part of this group called Truth and Transmission, or TAT, which is actually now based in North Carolina near Durham. But it was founded by a West Virginia mystic named Richard Rose, who is a underutilized, like not he's not known as much as he should be.
Hmm.
And so
That's probably better for him.
yeah, well he's dead now. He's been dead for a while.
Oh,
But
wow.
so his heyday was in the 70s, 70s and 80s. And so Art is in his 80s now. So I met him when I was in my 20, like when I was about 20, and he was in his 50s or 60s. Um, so that was my primary, and that was more focused on like self definition, self inquiry, um, understanding the nature of the self, going like that kind of stuff, that kind of spiritual work.
Great.
And then it wasn't until I got more involved in permaculture and did that when I was like 21, 22. And through that avenue, I found actually John Michael Greer and the Arc Druid Report back then. And and so through his writings, I got more involved in the actual more practical occultism and magic and astrology even.
Yeah, he's a
So
great entry point, man.
yeah,
I think
definitely.
it sounds like you lucked out. Came in through, I think that's a piece that a lot of modern occultists, especially younger ones, fuck it, a lot of the older ones too. Who am I kidding? They don't come in through the self-inquiry gate.
Yeah,
I think that I'm probably partial, I'm probably biased, but um, I think that that's probably one of the, if not the, one of the best gates that you can enter into any kind of spiritual investigation. And JMG, he's a friend. He's been on the podcast. Um, I mean, you can hardly get better writing.
for sure. Definitely feel very lucky to have stumbled upon him. It was like on a permaculture forum. Someone quoted Blood of the Earth, and I was like, what's this? And then I found Arc Druid Report, and I was hooked.
Yeah, he renders everything very uh understandable. It
Yeah,
doesn't have to be. He's not very florid. He's not. He's very concise. Uh, which is, as writers, it's like, damn, that's something that I'm still in awe of. I'm still trying to control the hyperbole, but at a certain point, it's just like, fuck it, that's me, right? I mean, if that's your thumbprint, that's your thumbprint. Um, so uh, just an aside, because I'm interested. Where'd you go to school?
I went to Pitt.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was up in Oneonta for a little while. I didn't know
Oh.
if you were around there,
Yeah,
but
I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, but
okay.
I was born in Ithaca.
Oh,
Families
ooh.
from Central Pennsylvania. My dad's family's from West Virginia. Grew up in West Pennsylvania. Moved to New York.
So you've
I was born
got
yeah,
you've got some Appalachia in you, right? Western Pennsylvania, right? I
yeah,
mean, what's
yeah,
really funny is when I had been to Pittsburgh before I had come down to North Carolina, and you know, there's the same, almost the same dialect. They say yins and everything. It's really
yeah.
remarkable. But
But we
that's
don't.
cool.
Yeah, we don't consider we don't think about Pennsylvania and New York as being Appalachia so much, but it actually I am Appalachian on both sides. Central Pennsylvania, um, West Virginia, and then I still live in the Appalachians in Central New York. So I definitely consider myself an Appalachian.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, cool. So you've do you do any kind of preparation of plant medicine at all, even for yourself? Because I
Yeah.
I don't really make stuff for other people either, but I would still consider myself somebody. I'd still consider myself somewhat of an herbalist, just because I feel like I'm still doing the protocols. I'm just not administering the medicine.
Right, yeah, and it depends on what you consider an herbalist. Just like depends on what you consider an astrologer. Um, and because my partner is an herbalist, and we interview a lot of herbalists who have been practicing professionally for a number of years, like I don't consider myself one because I'm not like seeing clients. I consider myself an astrologer because I'm seeing clients as an astrologer.
Mm.
But really, I mean, like if you're administrating herbs at all, even just to yourself, you are an herbalist. Yeah, and I have used the herbal uses for plants since I was a kid as well. But it's just not something I do like for other people as much. My partner makes lots of tinctures and salves and that kind of stuff, and you can find her actually at Traveling Herb Farmer. She does ship, and I do help her with that too. So I help her. I do a lot. I'm more on the growing side of stuff. I like to grow the plants and tend the gardens and that kind of stuff. But I do help harvest and prepare medicine as well, for
Okay.
sure.
Yeah, because I was going to ask, how far does alchemy come into the
Yeah.
practice? And I'm assuming on the growing side, I also do my own growing as well. Um, I'm assuming for you, it's more of an astrological thing, right?
Yeah, and so I there's just so many fun things to learn in this life, right?
Yeah.
And to really go deep, you gotta like kind of focus a little bit. So I remember it was a few years ago I started getting into alchemy more. I was like, I really want to do the alchemy, and I'm like reading Mark Stavish's book, reading like, all these other books, all those classics, and there's one of the first things is you got to learn astrology as well because astrology is a big part of it. So I started learning astrology too, and I've studied with Chris Warnock. I'm studying with Freedom Cole now in Vedic astrology. And I just kind of like went on that tangent. And so now I mainly use herbs. Like I I use herbs in a lot of stuff that do magically. But so even like astrological talismans, and there's a lot of herbal magic in the Heathen Golden Dawn as well. Um, and I do try to I do it more astrologically though, like more like based on where the planet, our day. I like trying to do things when the planet is in the ascendant or the midheaven, and it's well dignified, that kind of stuff. Uh, but I also like to combine the herbs with gems and metals when I'm making astrological talismans as well. Another fun thing to do for sure. But I would
Yeah.
like to get to alchemy again more, and maybe when I have time later on in life.
Yeah, it's definitely it's like astrology. Well,
Mhm.
it's twin science is
Mhm.
astrology, but it's like astrology in that it's almost completely overwhelming. So
Yeah,
you got to start with the basic, spagyric kind of
right.
preparations, I think. And most alchemists would recommend that. Uh, so are you using, I'm assuming you're using sidereal astrology.
Well, so it depends. So I use sidereal mainly when I'm seeing clients currently because I've studied natal astrology with Freedom Cole in the Akutananda Das lineage. So that's how it works for me. Like when I'm seeing clients, I'm using the sidereal zodiac. But I've studied astrological magic using the tropical zodiac. So
Mhm,
when I'm
yeah.
doing, so when I'm doing like astrological talismans, or that kind of work, I'm using the tropical zodiac. I do want to experiment more in the future. Um, and I try to make sure that elections are good in both zodiacs, which you can do. Um, I definitely try to do that now that I'm starting to like really grok how to do things on the Vedic way. Um, but yeah, I kind of use different zodiacs for different things, and if currently when I'm looking at mundane astrology, I'm looking more at the tropical, and even in the tradition I study in too, um, they do use tropical more for like weather and like planetary things. So to me, it makes sense to use it for gardening and
Mhm.
even for mundane astrology uh, at the moment. So that's where I am right now. I'm like pigeonholing like the different uh, zodiacs with the tool set that I learned them with.
Right. Yeah. You're toggling between systems.
Right.
Um, so one way that I've kind of so when I'm doing a horary, for example, or I'm doing a natal chart, I don't really do natal charts too much. I do more horary and I
Hmm.
do more electional.
Yeah.
That I'll use tropical because
Hmm.
it's not. to me, it's not really as predicated. There's some degree of what was going on. Ideally, I'd like to have both side by side, but it's more predicated on the division of the ecliptic than
Mhm.
it is on the actual location of
Right.
the stars and planets. But when I'm doing a ritual, I always need to know where the I refer to this stuff musically. I call it the tonic planet. Like the root
Uh,
note. I need to find the root note. I need to locate the planet in the sky. So I'll kind of toggle it between those things. And Phoenix Aurelius, the alchemist, he put me onto this one guy, Athen Chimenti, who's got a really interesting Western approach to sidereal um, astrology, true sidereal astrology. It's called Mastering the Zodiac. So
hmm.
that's a pretty cool kind of thing to me. But I'd like to hear more about your experiments down the road.
Yeah, yeah.
We do a lot of growing here. I mean, what would you say are the keystones of your application of
Mhm.
astrology to the growth and cultivation of your plants and your crops?
Sure. Yeah. So currently, the main things I do, and I'm using Foxfire basically for this.
Oh wow. Explain to our audience what that is, because that's like real hard to find now.
It is.
I
I've
mean,
found multiple.
down here, it's like because I think didn't it come from Appalachia down here in the
Yeah.
Carolinas?
Well,
It
yeah,
like
the
it
mountains of Western North Carolina for sure.
exactly. If you find one in Asheville, like at a yard sale or something like that,
Mm.
people jump on it like it's a grenade.
Wow. Yeah, I got a used hardback copy of it last year at a library sale. I've also found like Ficino's Three Books of Life at a library sale for like less than $1.
Wow.
But there's like a bunch of old people up here, and they're just so there's less it's less hip up here in Central
Yeah.
New York. So
True, true.
there's less competition for the gems. But so yeah, yeah. It's a book. There's a whole like 13 volumes of it at
A
this
lot
point.
of them. A lot of them.
Yeah. But the first volume, it's all this backwoods wisdom that they gleaned from old timers in Western North Carolina, I think other places in Appalachia. In This was in the 60s or early 70s. And they showed you how to build a cabin, how to dress a hog, and then how to plant by the signs, right?
Love it.
And this is like a survival of Renaissance astrology that's in North Carolina, that but in the same way that those folk ballads from the 1600s survived in North Carolina, like uh yeah, all those like House Carpenter, all those other ballads. um so this system of planting by the signs has stayed. It was stayed in North Carolina. They wrote it all down. They captured it in the 60s, 70s. And um, what I like about it too is that they're using the body, the zodiacal man, as
Mhm.
the zodiac.
Mhm.
So they have the head is Aries, the neck is Taurus, the feet are Pisces, right? And they say you plant potatoes in the feet, or what you do, whatever you do, you're doing it in that part of the body. And I really like that too, as a way of talking about the zodiac, especially as I've been studying astrology more, and studying the sidereal and the tropical, realizing like and I when I use tropical sidereal, I don't use true sidereal. I use it's 30-degree sections of the sky. That's the traditional way, but it's anchored to the fixed star Spica instead of to the equinoxes and the solstices.
Mhm.
That's the way the lineage does it. And but it is anchored to the actual constellations. And so now the actual constellation Cancer is like the not like the tropical sign of Cancer is not near the
Right.
actual stars of Cancer. So I think we need a new name for the tropical signs, and I'm sure that a lot of people will disagree with that. But I also think that this like old way of the hill folks in North Carolina of using the parts of the body as the zodiac signs is a good way to go potentially, like referring to Aries as the head, as tropical Aries to the head. So that's just a little pet project I have, and I wanted to put that out there. Uh,
Interesting.
but to get back to it, they have a bunch of lore in there about planting by the signs and the moon phases. So I what I do now mainly is I'm planting when the moon is in the water signs and Taurus. I try to
Mhm.
do that all times, and then I try to plant stuff that's more about roots. So either tubers, root crops, or when I'm trying to root a cutting, I'll do that in the waning moon and stuff that's trying to grow above ground in the waxing moon. And those are like the basic rules that I follow. And I'll get more precise. But that's kind of like just an easy thing, and it helps. And also like when I'm cutting stuff, like weeding, I try to weed in the waning moon, especially the dark moon when it's like almost fully new. That's a really great time to like get rid of what you don't want, So I'm getting rid of weeds then. So that's just like the basic way I do it.
Yeah, and then so we kind of do the same thing here when it's applicable. We're only doing it for ourselves and we're not raising major crops. So as the schedule permits. We actually just moved to a new property. So but right now we have an indoor grow room, and we're using grow bags for some of the crops because we're on a really shady property, and so
Yeah.
we're moving them around to see where we get sun. We don't know where we get sun. The leaves are coming in,
Yeah.
so it's like we don't
Yeah.
even know where the sun is going to fall for most of the day. But yeah, to that point, um, in the waning cycle, the plants will grow down. So
Hmm.
they'll root
Right.
much deeper and dig further down towards the water table. Whereas in the full of the moon, or when it's waxing full, they'll grow up. I think they'll grow towards the light, right? But I think in like the Latin American um culture, or let's say folklore, they call it savia, right?
Mhm.
The energy or the moisture from the plant, the savia moves up and down vertically in these alternating cycles according to the lunar cycles. Just
Yeah.
just for listeners to understand why why we do that.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. It's like the blood of the plant, like
Right.
the life force of the plant.
Exactly. I think that's what that word kind of indicates. But yeah, I'm glad you cleared that up. So you've got the Plant Cunning podcast, which is kind of it's pretty. You're definitely making some noise, man. You're definitely out there in the podosphere, So I congratulate you on that.
Thanks. Yeah.
How'd you get started with that?
It was 2020.
Yeah.
Are we gonna? I've always liked podcasts a lot. I actually don't have time to listen to podcasts that much anymore because of all the lectures I'm listening in the courses I'm doing. But I like to listen to podcasts or lectures when I'm working out in the garden or driving or doing manual labor, so I can learn. And so I've always liked podcasts. I've also liked how podcasters then get to talk to people that you wouldn't normally get to talk to. So that was another pull for me.
Yep.
So like we started in 2020. One of our first guests was Byron Ballard, and John Michael Greer was another first guest. So getting to be able to have a conversation with John Michael Greer, I can do that. Having a podcast. So that was one of the big impetuses. Um, and that's how we got started. We figured there's a niche there of magic, herbalism, healing, spirituality. Um, and there are other podcasts that go into that niche, but none doing it the way that we're doing it. So
Mhm.
we figured would be a good people to fill that niche, because we already we have a lot of people in our networks already who are like practicing herbalists, famous herbalists, magicians, astrologers, and so on. So we could start by reaching out to them. And since then, we've just been building, and trying to do as many interviews as we can. Lately, we've been putting out one a week. And as you know, it takes a lot of work to get the right date and time to meet the person online,
Yeah.
and then you have to edit it. So it's yeah,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, Byron Ballard, she is like the wise woman of Western North Carolina. I actually heard about her.
yeah.
I heard about her in the Firefox volumes, I think in the same conversation, to be honest with
Oh,
you. But
yeah.
yeah, she's over in, I think, just outside of Asheville as well.
Hmm.
I've crossed paths with her at a couple of they do like these big like plant uh I don't even know. There's like this whole kind of I want to say like festival grounds type of thing, and I mean it's huge over there in Western WNC, and I've seen her at a couple of those just because somebody's kind of pointed out like, oh, that's Byron Ballard, so she's definitely a celebrity over there, so that's
Good.
really cool that she was your first guest. That's a big, I started this podcast just kind of shooting the shit with my friends, so that's a great inaugural episode, I think, pretty auspicious.
Yeah, and she was one of the. She might have been the first. It was either her or John Michael Greer.
Still.
But yeah. So it was one of those, and that's how we got started for sure. So
That's great, man. So what do you like most about doing it now after the fact? Is there any has it
yeah.
because I know it's changed for me.
Yeah.
What are you excited about now that what's different than 4 years ago?
Well, one thing is getting to hear from listeners, and that's always great. And I've been offering my astrology readings now publicly for the last few months, and people have. I mean, a lot of people have been taking me up on the offer. And so I've been getting to meet a lot of the listeners too and do readings for them. And hearing back from them and stuff like that. We had a conference last summer, and I got to meet a lot of listeners in person, which was great. And the other thing, the growing edge for the Plant Cunning podcast is doing reels, uh, which apparently that's the growing edge for podcasts in general. Like you need to put on these 30-second to a minute reels on Instagram. And I've actually been finding it to be a lot of fun because you get to like sift through the episode, find like some gems, and
Yeah.
then like go over them, edit them up, and then you make this like nice little like piece. It's so this gem. You cut the gem, you shape it, and then you give it out to the world. And some of them have done really well. Most of them do all right, but that's been a fun thing too. And then you're gaining a new audience, and people who wouldn't necessarily listen to the podcast, don't have time to listen to a podcast, can get
Mhm.
a couple like gems. So that's been like one of the fun things now that I've been doing. Yeah.
Great. That's great. Yeah, I think I did like one or two. I cut them up in the beginning and I put them up on Facebook and nothing, you know. They kind
Yeah.
of I noticed that there's not a lot of response there, so I kind of gave up on them. But I do this other podcast with my buddy Sky Mathis, and he's real good at chopping that stuff up. He does a really great job. But maybe that's something I should look into.
Yeah, and I find also that like we post them on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube,
Mhm.
and sometimes
Oh,
one will
you're on
blow.
TikTok. Okay.
Yeah, we've entered that arena.
All right, all right. God bless you.
Well, it's like I'm already making the video. Might
Yeah.
as well post it everywhere. And I have found that it'll a video will blow up on one of those platforms, but be crickets on another one.
Okay.
And it'll be random. Like I have no idea. Like this last round, I interviewed we interviewed Mason from Herb Rally, and one of the reels popped off on YouTube. One of them popped off on TikTok, and one of them popped off on Instagram. But the other ones didn't. So it was
Yeah.
just it's funny how that goes.
These are the
And
problems. These are the problems
it
facing
takes a
modern astrologers.
right, right, yeah, and it also takes a while for like the algorithm to notice you too. It's which is annoying, but
Yeah, I mean, I thought for a while I knew I had like a something dialed in. Got to post at this time, and it's kind of unless you're posting a meme, like there's just no, you have no idea how well something's gonna do or where. Or I do know that anytime that I'll say that this. I'll say this publicly, probably for the first time. Um, the reach of the videos in terms of the Google algorithm, or of the YouTube algorithm, you can go and see like, okay, where am I getting click throughs? How much of this is because YouTube showed or recommended the video to people? As soon as I started talking about esoteric Christianity, everything went boom. It's just fucking, it's just completely plateaued. Which that's definitely says something. I don't know about what or whom, but it definitely a marked statement there. So you mentioned that you had a conference last summer.
Mm.
Are you doing that again? What is it? Plant Cunning Conference?
Yeah, the PCC, the Plant Cunning Conference. So yeah, we had it last year. We had some fantastic speakers. We sold out. It was a small conference of 125 people.
Right.
And yeah, we had Matthew Wood, do the keynote, which was great. And this year we're having Pam Montgomery do the keynote. We're having Becky Byer come, Rebecca Byer from Western North Carolina.
Yeah, she's been on the pod. She's great.
Yeah, she's great. And Michael Bryan, who's a really fantastic astrologer. He's in Boston. Um, and a bunch of other great herbalists, astrologers, healers, and so on. And it's going to be the 26th through the 28th of July. So,
Okay.
yeah,
Is there like a digital access for that too, or is it in person only?
it is only in person. Yeah, and there are going to be limited. We have a limited space. I think we're going to cap it at 150 or 200 people
Okay.
this year because we're going to get a bigger tent. But it's at our farm. So, uh, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah,
That's
it's good to have like an intimate, small conference, and you really you get to know like at least recognize everybody who's there, and it's nice to have like kind of a smaller conference for
Yeah,
sure.
you don't get lost in all the handshaking and stuff. Like you get to sit down and actually have meaningful conversations with people that are like longer than 10 minutes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, exactly.
That's great. One thing that I want to talk about with you, and I think
Mhm.
that this is a really you're kind of the perfect guest to talk about this right now. Um, One of the things I noticed when I began really kind of taking that extra step, that further step into, I was always interested in herbal medicine, just because I have a very high suspicion of of institutions, and so allopathic Western medicine always turned me off. So I began with kind of really getting like stuff in pill format, all sorts of at the local health store near me where I was. And over time, I started growing and building garden boxes and stuff like that. And I really started to take that extra step, that I would say that esoteric level of beginning to form relationships with the individual plants.
Yeah,
And you know, it's very hard. It's almost ineffable, very difficult to understand. But there's definitely certain plants that I've found that have distinct personalities based on the families and things like that.
yeah.
But even plants in general, depending on where they're located and where you've got them, who they're next to, will sort of have this expressiveness. Have you experienced that too, or is this kind of? Do you think it's just a little bit of projection?
I think you're entirely crazy. Just kidding.
Well, join the ranks.
No, no, of course. Like every plant has a personality, just like every person has a personality. Every dog has a personality. Every cat has a personality. And I see it more on species level, though there is some like different trees will have a different personality, different patches of plants will have a different personality.
Mhm.
But there is some sort of a more like species level situation going on with them. Um, and definitely you get to know plants, and part of it is just like the way they grow. Like, do they have thorns? Do they not? Like, what kind of feeling do you get from the
Yes.
plant? And then getting to know them at different stages of growth. Like recognizing a certain plant when it's at a seedling, recognizing because a lot of plants change their leaf shape at different stages of growth, and you won't know that this seedling turns into this herbaceous rosette that then turns into this flower.
Hmm.
And so getting to know plants on that level is one level. I think there is also a deeper level as well, because I do really uh, feel that all plants have there's the animism thing is definitely real, and as real as I am or you are, if I have a spirit, if I have a soul, plants do as well. I would say for sure.
Yeah, and you can even, so to push in a little further, let's see
Yeah.
what you think. Being trained in you know, I'll bet you know your way around the Western esoteric kind of approach of these things. I feel like you would have to have read at least the first book of occult philosophy by Agrippa, or be familiar with some sections of it. But in his work there, he's really creating, or he's reconstructing a version of Neoplatonic theurgy during this time period in Germany, where you've got, well, in Europe in general, you've got a revival of these texts, a rediscovery of these texts, and at the same
Yeah.
time, you have this folk tradition. Um, but he talks about everything having an ontological hierarchy,
Mm.
right? So the same, it's kind of like the same way where it's like, okay, if you work in, um, goetic magic, stuff where you're doing conjuration, you're or even in evocation, ritual evocation, you're calling in the spirits, the intelligences of
Mm.
planets and things like that. So I tend to think that, and you'll hear this a lot, like with people who use very potent plant medicine, like ayahuasca and peyote and things like that. They'll talk about communing with I guess the deeper spirit of the plant, like they would call it like mother ayahuasca or something like that, finding again that like root note to it all. But I find that implies that there's this whole kind of chain that you're tapping into, an ontological chain of spirit, intelligence, root consciousness, and things like that when you are growing a plant, but also right when you're imbibing that. So, I mean, do you have any insight on that? Is that something that do you normally go that far when you're working with these things, particularly in magic?
Right. So there's kind of different levels to this. And one level, like there's the plant deva, right? Which you could in Western esotericism we usually use the word deva, but you could say angel or spirit. And that's kind of like it's not like the way I see it is it's not like each individual plant has that, especially for herbaceous plants. Though there is an individuality again to like different trees, different patches. But there's like a higher level of entity that is the deva or the an angel of that plant species.
Mm,
And you can I definitely think you tap into that, like which with whatever plant you're working with, whether it be ayahuasca or dandelion.
yeah.
There is a dandelion deva. They also plants are associated with I mean, as you know, as an alchemist, with the hierarchy, the celestial hierarchies. And I don't necessarily think those are the same thing. So like the plant spirit, the plant deva of ayahuasca, it may be associated with a celestial hierarchy of like planets and so on. But maybe it's not like dandelion is. I don't think that dandelion is a Jupiterian spirit, though it shares in the sphere of Jupiter, right? But in the same way, something like dandelion also shares in the sphere of the sun with that bright yellow flower,
Right.
you know? And the way I see it too is like when you're using maybe like the flower of the dandelion and you're harvesting it on the hour of the sun, then you're going to have more of a solar uh, expression. When you're harvesting the root during a Jupiter hour, you're going to have more of a Jupiterian expression.
Mhm.
And this is the same way with like minerals, like in the Picatrix and the in astrological magic in general, like one uh one rock, one gem can be ruled by multiple, or can be used in multiple planetary correspondences. For instance, like ruby is more solar, but you could also use that for Mars.
Right. Yeah, because the whole thing is that the fact that it has a material body, it requires a multitude of these influences in order to construct something of that density and of right. Everything here is a product of permutation.
Right, exactly.
Rose is a great example. Sure, the flower of the rose is Venusian, but the thorns are martial.
Yeah.
No, because there can't exist anything here in the material pure.
Right.
Everything is mixed with each other. But so
And,
how do you?
well, just like with people too, like, every person has all of the planets in their chart, but some people have in Vedic astrology, we'll say a Mahapurusha yoga, where the Jupiter is exalted in the 10th house or something like that. They're going to be very Jupiterian, you know? Some people have multiple Mahapurusha yogas. So they have Jupiter in the 10th house in Cancer, and then they have Mercury in Virgo. Actually, it would have to be Jupiter in Sagittarius, and Mercury in Gemini or Virgo, which you could have them both be on angles that way. Because you have to have the planet in its own sign or exaltation on an angle, and that so that embodies the greater. And usually one of those will win out. But we have multiple. We have all of these planets in us. Some of them are stronger than others. Some of us exemplify more Jupiterian or Mercurial or Saturnian influences at different times as well. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's all mixed.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the great thing about magic, right? Is learning how to concentrate these things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You can do that. Right, we can do that alchemically by the solvate coagula formula, where you extract the sulfur and the mercury and then the salt, and then you recombine. And in the case of something like talismanic magic, you're pulling in all the consonances and the synthemata, or the sigillum, as Agrippa would have put it, and heightening a particular planet or element, to work with that, and then and to consecrate and charge the talisman with that particular concentration. That's the great thing about magic, is there are basically occult methods, or methods of working with the unseen forces to be able to purify the mixed, which is a pretty
Yeah.
fascinating thing. So how much of this stuff is in the Heathen Golden Dawn? I'm interested, right? Because that's the gate I came in through, really, is the Golden Dawn. So I balk a little bit at that title, but talk to me about it. I'm interested.
Well, the first thing to note is that the Golden Dawn, first of all, was a syncretic situation. So this is entirely in line with the tradition of the Golden Dawn, in my opinion, and in John Michael Greer's opinion, because I based this off of John Michael Greer's The Celtic Golden Dawn, and I actually did it because he and another magician had started doing some rituals to start a Heathen Golden Dawn. The other magician balked. He had other commitments, so they didn't finish it, and I was doing it, and I was like, where do I go next? So I was like, okay. And I asked JMG, and he's like, well, just start doing it, So I was like, okay, I'll take on the project. I will do it. And that's what I did. And so, yeah, in the Heathen Golden Dawn, I'm based mainly off of the Celtic Golden Dawn, but we're using the heathen deities. So there's actually 3 tracks, one for Anglo-Saxon, one for Norse, and then one for like kind of a modern approach. And we're using the runes as like the magical alphabet, and the divination. And then we're using the basic rituals. There's the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. There's the middle pillar. But there's an Alu ritual, which it was like the Rose Cross ritual, which is a really great ritual. And then I'm also doing, there's Supreme, there's the elemental pentagram rituals. And that was more, the Celtic Golden Dawn went more in that direction, but I decided to take it more in a planetary direction. because, first of all, I'm an astrologer. I love astrology. The second is that we have embedded in our language and in our culture currently an association and a correspondence between the heathen gods and the planets already in the days of the week, which it goes way before the heathen gods, of course. Comes from Babylon, or Chaldea, but Thor, Thursday, Jupiter, Woden, Wednesday, Mercury, Sun, Sunday, right? It's already there. So, and these associations have been around since probably around 400 AD. So that's a long time. So there's big tracks in space have already developed with these correspondences. So I figured might as well utilize that, right? So there's also all these hexagram rituals.
Right. That was my next question.
Yeah. So hexagram rituals, utilizing the divine names and the planets, and then we're also doing like there's also the herbalism, and we have in the heathen tradition we have the 9 herbs charm, which is an Anglo-Saxon charm from 900s AD or CE, and it references Woden, and it refers to all of these 9 herbs by name, addressing them in sort of an animistic way, like talking to the spirit of the plant. So that plant spirit herbalism is part of it too. And then we also have the correspondences with the planets. So I'm using these herbs that are common through the northern hemisphere, that are North European based, using their planetary correspondences, and then you can, make an amulet using the solar herbs in the hexagram ritual to make a potent solar amulet, right? And then there's a bunch of other stuff. We actually do also the Tree of Life, and this I'm using actually a nonogram, 9 pointed star ritual, and actually we're using the Valknut, and that's for the Tree of Life. So there's all the correspondences too between the spheres of the Tree of Life and the worlds, the 9 worlds. So yeah, there's some other stuff, but that's kind of like the core of the course of study, and it takes a few years to do, going from the thrall grade to the king grade, if you want to say it that way, because there's the 4 classes from the rigor, the myth of rigor, and so the Rigstula is the so so you go through those 4 classes. Those are the 4 grades, basically. Yeah, and that's kind of like the main situation. So this should be out now, by the time this is coming. This episode is coming out, and it's through Aeon Books, a London-based publishing company. You can get that anywhere that you'd like. So it's a lot of fun. I had a lot of fun doing it, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you get to express sort of your creativity there, and what and the lens that you approach spirit through. So that's pretty cool. Would you consider yourself as heathen, or is it just kind of you picked up where the ball kind of got left?
Well, I've been working with, like, in a way I am a heathen for sure. I've worked with the heathen gods for a long time, and with the runes for a long time. If you trace my ancestry back, theoretically, I am descended from Frey, from Ingudi Frey, which actually a lot of people are. So they're in my blood. And I speak an English. English language is a Germanic language, so that's part of it. And I do offerings to Frey regularly, and I've been working with them for a long time. But also, I don't know if eclectic is the right word. I study traditions in depth, and I take them deeply. But for instance, in the Vedic astrological lineage that I study in, they say that a good astrologer should. It's like most people should just follow one pantheon, right, and just work with one pantheon. But if you're an astrologer then you're working with all these different people who each have their own pantheon, or maybe even multiple pantheons, 2 pantheons or something like that, or work with multiple deities. But you need to have connections to all of the different energies that you're working with, and especially in the U.S., there's so many. And like in the tradition, even the traditional lineage, like which is a Vaishnavite lineage, they work with Vishnu forms as well as Shiva forms as well as Devi forms. So it's even though it's a Vishnu based lineage, they still work with other pantheons too. And so one of the things that Freedom has been doing too is working with other pantheons as well, and doing, because one of the other reasons I wanted to study in this tradition is that it's very remedy based. So, and a lot of the remedies are working on a karmic level, and you're working with deities either through mantra or prayer or offerings, that kind of a thing, to be working at things on a higher level, because everything's downstream from the divine plane, right? So you need to be able to like translate that into different people's pantheons. And one of the things that I want to be doing is offering this kind of a thing to heathens, and help with people who are just focused on the heathen pantheon, to do astrological remediation and be able to work with these energies in that kind of a way, because it's like the heathen tradition has been, it wasn't, I don't know if it's been totally destroyed, but it pretty much was in the Middle Ages. And there are some lineages of working with runes and so on that have survived, but the whole priest class was destroyed. So like these living traditions that are still going on in the Vedic, and they're related to the Vedic priests. I mean, that's the Vedic priests, the Druids, the Norse, the whatever you want to call them, the priests there. Because people have a lot of different words for that, but they all come from the same root culture, and there are a lot of similarities. So I'm trying to but of course these other Hinduism has Vedic, and Vedic is not just Hindu. There's a lot of other things going on, but that has been continuing to be developed over the centuries, right? Whereas heathenry, people are doing some hardcore reconstruction, and in a way I think it's too strict, and they're throwing away anything that's not, but it's not fleshed out. You can't have a fleshed out living tradition. So
well, yeah, I find that cultural identity or nationalism tends to be really strongly associated with the use of northern pantheons. It's a cultural identity thing for a lot of people that are still there. It's kind of like, it's Josephine McCarthy, actually. She had said, one of my favorite things, she said, in America, everybody wants to work with all these Egyptian, everybody loves the Greek gods and all that stuff. But you have a wealth of, as you're saying, the tracks made here to the indigenous cultures and the gods that they had. You're literally working with the same animals, the same plant species, the ground that they worshipped on. But so you don't really see a whole lot of that, especially now, because there's this kind of pussyfooting around appropriation and things like that. But I agree with you. To me, it's like each expression of an energy that we use this kind of, astral gateway or this imaginal faculty to interact with, right? But exactly, they're all different expressions of the same energy, like fingers on a glove, right? It's so these fingers, they kind of look discrete. They look like they have an individual sort of existence, but really, it's all the hand that slips into the glove and animates it. So I think that's pretty interesting, and I could be incorrect about that, but just very peripherally, I've seen one of that sort of just being very, very hard lined about it, because there's some sort of cultural identity, or maybe even a common scourge, right? I see a lot of people, and I'm not saying it's undue, but I see a lot of people kind of rallying into that thing as a bulwark against, the Christianization of those places, because the Christianization, well, really the Romanization of those places is what destroyed their classes, but also, Christianity coming kind of really either sterilizing or just wiping out completely um their their indigenous
Yeah.
forms of worship. But that,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a political conversation.
Well, I mean, like you can just look at Saint Boniface cutting down the sacred oak of Thor, That's a
Absolutely.
symbol for the whole thing. And yeah. And the way I look at like archetypes and how they're expressed, also like astrology is a really good way of being able to do that because the planets, the visible planets are visible in any place in the world. The sun and the moon are like they create our time. They create our experience. So like tapping into those archetypes and it's a good language for being able to talk about and interact with higher levels. you know.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. So do you have, is all your stuff like, the work that you do astrologically, the Heathen Golden Dawn, the podcast, the conference, is all that stuff kind of on one place online, or do you have different sort of links? Where can people go if they want to, find more out about you?
Yeah. So Plant Cunning is sort of the hub generally. Um, so we do have a website, plantcunning.com, and there's a link to the conference there. You should be able to find links to the podcast there. We're also on all of the social media places. I'm liking Instagram the best. Like I like kind of Facebook for certain things and Instagram for certain things. I don't like TikTok at all, but I still post on it.
That's well, then you're in the best possible situation, right? Because with TikTok, you probably have the most probability of something going like viral. And if you can avoid scrolling through it, then great, you're safe.
Well, I don't have a smartphone, so
Great.
I use the computer to post everything.
Amazing.
Yeah, so it's actually easier to scroll on like YouTube or Facebook. So,
Dude, that was probably the best thing anyone has ever said on this podcast. I don't have a smartphone.
well, I actually to be
Fucking
fair,
A.
I actually do have an old smartphone that I use to like hook up to Wi-Fi and download lectures and podcasts on so I can listen to them.
Yeah.
But it's not really a
Respect.
smartphone.
Respect, man. What about, so would people reach out to you for your astrological remediation?
Yeah, so they can hit me up at info@plantcunning.com.
Great.
That's the email. And I will you know, I will get them a date and we'll figure out a date and we can look at your chart. So I generally do about hour-long readings, and I look at the basic like karmic framework through the astrological chart, and then offer basic remedies at this point. At this level of my study, I can offer some basic remedies. Um, but as I'm learning more and taking more advanced studies with my teachers, then I'll be able to offer even more elaborate techniques. But what I'm doing now is actually pretty good for most people. Yeah, I'm able to see a lot with just these what I've been doing.
So I've got a question for you, and I'm sure a lot of other people have been wondering this too.
Yeah,
Right. So you go on, let's just say you go on the generic sort of AstroSeek or something like that. You go on a natal chart calculator, and you want to try sidereal, right? Because the whole sidereal thing is making a lot more sense in this postmodernist, positivistic. No, there needs to be a rational physical explanation for this stuff. So people are trying out, but then you get the drop down menu and there's about 40 like,
yeah,
I don't know,
yeah, yeah.
Vedic terms. So what's the difference there? How do you figure out
Right.
which way to go?
So that it's called the Ionumsha. It's the difference between the precession of the equinoxes and basically the difference between the tropical zodiac and the sidereal. And we factor in like the how long the Ionumsha is, whether it's like 23 degrees or 24 degrees, and different people have different Ionumshas. But it actually is it looks like there's a lot more disagreement as to what that is than there actually is. Because in the West, there's like the Fagin Bradley, and all the other things. But in India, it's Lahiri. Lahiri is the main Ayanamsha that we use.
Okay.
And in my tradition, that's what we use. It's also the main in India. It's the unified sidereal Ayanamsha. There is a little. It's actually in my tradition. It's actually a little bit more fine tuned than just the Lahiri. We use it's like the fixed star Chitra or Spica. The fixed star Spica is the cusp of Libra.
Mm.
And that's the tie. That's where the 30 degrees are tied to the fixed stars.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's the one to use. And it's also good to like see for yourself. You know, it does take a while to learn how to use Vedic astrology, but you are able to see very specific events and things, and you can it's either working or it isn't, you know.
Yeah.
And the Lahiri, it works. So
Yeah.
yeah, and again, just so if people aren't familiar, like, so the sidereal zodiac it's the same 12 sections of 30 degrees of the sky, but it's anchored at the fixed star Spica for us, whereas the tropical zodiac is anchored at the spring equinox.
Got it. Great. And you find a lot of you find the Western and the Vedic. You find that they kind are there areas of agreement, you know, or does one kind of contradict the other? What are you finding in your studies right now?
Well, I'm finding that you're able to see a lot of the same things in either one, and you're able to see different things in each one as well.
Okay.
So in one way, like they're about yeah, 24 degrees apart now, so it's like almost a whole sign. And for most people, for fifth of people, if I'm right, the about that the transits are going to be the same through the houses, right?
Okay.
You know, the planets are still all in the same place in the sky,
Right.
you know, so they're still bouncing off your natal chart in the same way, no matter how you are describing that natal chart, whatever, you know. And I like to look at the different zodiacs and different styles of astrology and systems of astrology as something more like a language or an art form. You know, they're a way to describe what's happening.
Yeah.
And so you can paint the same person. You can paint a portrait of somebody using crayons or oils or pastels, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And you can talk about a dog in any language, but there are certain things like poetry doesn't translate
Right.
perfectly. So
Yeah.
there are certain things you can say in one language that you can't say in another language. And that's what I'm finding with the Vedic astrology is there are certain things that I can see and say using this system. And this is a traditional system that's been so my Padam Guru, Sanjay Roth, who is one of the most famous astrologers in India, his father was the last his grandfather was the last royal astrologer in Orisha. And this lineage goes back hundreds of years, you know. So they've had time to fine tune everything. And so there's just the depth of it is mind boggling to me. But there's things you can see with that you can't see. But they don't use outer planets, you know. And it's also,
Yeah. I mean, neither do I.
right. But at the same time, like, you know, like I can see, like I've got Uranus in my first house, and that I can see certain things about that, you know. But I can see the same things happening by looking at my Rahu, you know. And it's interesting how you can like talk about a character using both, but in different ways. So that's just my 2 cents on that.
That's a good perspective. I like that analogy. Clears things up. So you think what's next? Chinese astrology, or you think you'll get that far east, or what do you think?
Oh no. What's next? Well, I'm continuing to deepen my study in this tradition because this tradition is like an ocean, really. So I'm going to continue with that. I'd like to learn Sanskrit at some point here. Um, yeah, and I don't know. There's a lot of stuff I'm contemplating, and,
Mhm.
and seeing what I don't know what the next move is, but for now, my path is pretty much set on in this course of study for the next while. I've got a lot on my plate. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
understandable. All right, so canned question
Yeah.
for anybody that's listened to this podcast this evening and wants some entry points to further understand or delve into some of the topics we've spoken about. Give us 3 books that you'd recommend as starting points.
Right. Okay. So if somebody is really interested in Vedic astrology, and like when I say really interested, it is like they want to learn it. I would recommend my teacher's books, Freedom Cole, his books, Science of Light, Volume 1 and Volume 2. And they are a comprehensive introduction and foundation to Vedic astrology. You can read those books over and over again, and you will not get them. Like fully. There's like you're always, but he lays it down step by step, lays it out step by step. So honestly, I would take his course if you really want to study Vedic astrology, but those books are really good. Um, so that would be for Vedic astrology there. Let's say for astrological magic, I feel like Ficino's 3 books on life
Very
is
nice.
yeah, that's a classic, maybe a little underutilized. Um, and yeah, that would be my next book for astrological magic. Though, yeah, and then for self-inquiry. So I would be remiss to not mention a Richard Rose book, and I think one of the best introductions to his thinking and his is the um, direct mind experience, which is kind of a thick book of his, but it's based on his talks and lectures. So direct mind experience by Richard Rose is also another good one if you want some. And Richard Rose is a really fascinating character. So yeah, real West Virginia mountain man who was enlightened. It's like, and he's a real deal guy. So
Great.
yeah, interesting character for sure.
Awesome. All right, Isaac Hill, thank you so much, man, for joining me. I've had a pleasure talking with you, and I'm looking forward to everything that you've got going on in the future, man. So thanks for being on.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ike, for having me.